Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. So let's cover these topics in a comprehensive and detailed manner so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you're preparing for 2026 and beyond, you have a golden opportunity to enroll for Unacademy's online classroom program at just 19,999 with up to 12 months of free extension. This special offer ends tomorrow, as Unacademy has informed us, and the prices are likely to be increased from 1st of August. This will give you access to all the live and recorded lectures, the study material, the test series, and as well as the mentorship and doubt resolution sessions. So those interested can enroll by entering the code IAS English. On the subscription page, you might see a different price, but once you enter the code IAS English, you'll be able to avail this discounted offer. So those interested can click on the link provided in the video description below. And if you want the PDF of the session, please scan the QR code on your screen, join my Telegram channel, because after the session ends, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So let's get started and look at the first important article. On page number 8, the Hindu carries a detailed article on a recent ruling provided by the International Court of Justice with regard to the UN Climate Change Convention and the global climate obligations. The International Court of Justice, which is a primary organ of the United Nations, has passed an important advisory opinion. So hence it becomes important to first understand what is ICJ, what is the role and composition of ICJ, and what is its advisory opinion regarding the climate obligations, and what implications does it have with regard to the climate agreements that we have currently. So let's break down this topic in complete detail. The ICJ, or International Court of Justice, is one of the primary organs of the United Nations. It is headquartered at The Hague in Netherlands, and it comprises of up to 15 judges who are elected by UN Security Council and the UN General Assembly. So these two organs of the UN conduct an election for ICJ judges. And these judges, once they are elected, they are no longer representatives of their respective nations. For example, there is an Indian judge on the ICJ, Justice Dalveer Bhandari, a former Supreme Court judge. But once elected as a judge of ICJ, they become an international judge. They don't necessarily represent the country that they are coming from. They will have to be neutral and abide by international law and uphold international law as ICJ judges. So they are elected by the UN General Assembly and the UN Security Council, and they're elected for a 9-year term which is provided to them. So the International Court of Justice plays a critical role when it comes to enforcement of international law. The ICJ primarily handles two types of cases. It can settle disputes between the UN member states. When UN member states have disputes against each other, they can approach International Court of Justice, and the final ruling of ICJ becomes binding on them. It is legally binding, as the UN member states would have accepted the UN Charter. The ICJ, which is set up through the UN Charter, so its final verdict, which is delivered when two states have approached the International Court of Justice, right, for a litigation, those rulings will become legally binding. So this is one type of litigation that ICJ will handle. The other type of litigation is advisory opinion, which is sought by international organizations. This is not binding in nature, but advisory opinion can be obtained by international organizations. Any global organization, it could be, let's say, the UN and its institutions, such as UNESCO, UNICEF, for example, or let's say the Climate Change Convention and the way in which it is being implemented. So, if there are any issues with the legal issues concerning these global treaties and international organizations, they can also approach ICJ for advisory opinion, for legal clarification. So, these are the only two types of cases that are handled by the ICJ. Please make a note. This is very important for your prelims. It either takes up cases filed by UN member states against another UN member state. For example, India got a stay order from ICJ when Indian national Kulbhushan Jadhav was delivered the death punishment in Pakistan on charges of alleged involvement in terror activities. India has stayed the death punishment given to Kulbhushan Jadhav through this order, and it's binding on Pakistan. So such disputes between states are handled by ICJ and the orders are binding. The other type of cases taken up by ICJ involves providing advisory opinion, providing legal clarification, which is sought by international organizations. International institutions can approach ICJ for legal advice. So, in a similar matter, with regard to climate obligations, the ICJ had been approached by some of the concerned parties and stakeholders seeking legal advice of the ICJ, seeking the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice on the Paris Agreement, the goals and targets that are laid down under it, the Kyoto Protocol, and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Now, those who know the background would be aware that the UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, that was a byproduct of the Rio Earth Summit, it essentially laid the foundation for climate negotiations. For the first time, countries were able to come together on a single platform to talk about the implications of climate change and come out with solutions to tackle the threat posed by climate change. So, under the Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention, the COP summits, which would happen every year, in 1997, countries worked out the Kyoto Protocol that became the first ever binding climate agreement. Under the Kyoto Protocol, developed industrialized nations were categorized as Annex 1, Annex 2 nations, and their role in historical emissions was explicitly recognized. The concept of historical responsibilities was clearly recognized under the Kyoto Protocol because developed industrialized nations, which had already burnt massive quantities of fossil fuels over 150 plus years, they were primarily accountable for the global warming and the climate change which was being witnessed. So these developed industrialized nations were categorized under Annex 1, Annex 2 nations, and they were essentially held accountable for the historical responsibilities, meaning they had to do more, they had to contribute more to tackle emissions and to replace dirty fuel with cleaner renewable forms of energy. This provided for a very essential principle in climate change, the CBDR, which was championed by the Global South. Developing countries like India, that gave leadership to the Global South, championed the principle of CBDR through groupings such as the G77. The Group of 77, which is a grouping of Global South countries that brings many developing, underdeveloped countries together. It was led by India, China, and other developing nations, including Brazil, which gave leadership to all these underdeveloped and developing countries. And they championed the cause of this principle called CBDR, which has been a defining principle, a foundational principle of the Climate Change Convention. CBDR stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibilities, meaning the goal of fighting climate change is common for every country. Every country wishes to fight climate change, but the responsibility they take up will be differentiated. It will be based on historical emissions. The extent to which they have contributed to global warming, that would be the extent of their contribution to fight climate change. These developed nations, which are accountable for historical responsibilities, the ones listed under Annex 1, Annex 2, they should not only contribute more, put in more money, research and technology and effort, they should also assist the global south by providing them with finance and technology. They were obligated by Kyoto Protocol to share finance and provide for technology to help the smaller countries and the weaker countries transition towards cleaner sources of energy. So these countries were expected to deliver based on their respective capabilities. And the principle even became known as CBDR and RC. RC for respective capabilities. Because even amongst the developing and underdeveloped countries, the capabilities of each nation, it varies. The global south countries had a right to continue burning fossil fuels in order to solve their socio-economic problems, to lift people out of poverty, and to provide for better welfare. There was a need for them to use cheaper fuel, use up the remaining carbon budget, because the carbon budget was primarily exploited and utilized by the developed industrialized nations. That's how they managed to lift people out of poverty and transform their economies by freely burning fossil fuels for easily 150 to 200 years. So now the space for global south was being created where they could utilize and consume the rest of the carbon budget, continue focusing on fossil fuels while trying to transition towards clean renewable energy. And under this principle, the concept of equity was really promoted. That each country would contribute to the extent that they have been responsible for climate change. And each country will contribute to the extent of their respective capabilities. And that is why the CBDR RC principle is the very underlying foundation of climate change talks and negotiations. But of late, this principle has been threatened. Now, if you look at the Paris Agreement, the current climate agreement of 2015, which basically replaced the Kyoto Protocol, it has almost done away with the CBDR concept. It doesn't explicitly mention the CBDR RC principle. And developed nations in particular, especially countries like United States, they've been trying to dismantle the climate framework itself. Under President Donald Trump, the US had previously quit the Paris Agreement when Trump was president for the first time between 2016 and 2020. Then the Biden administration had brought the US back into the Paris Accord. But now that Trump administration is back in power, the US has again withdrawn from Paris Agreement and it is exiting from the climate framework itself. So essentially the US is undermining the climate framework. Then even other developed nations which have historical responsibilities, they are essentially discrediting the very designation of the developed nations as Annex 1, Annex 2 countries. They want to discredit the Climate Change Convention and Kyoto Protocol because they are the ones which explicitly mention CBDR and CBDR RC concept. They're only trying to push Paris Agreement as the sole climate agreement with no relevance for Climate Change Convention and the Kyoto Protocol. This has been the argument of some developed nations, even few European countries. They argue that the UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol have become irrelevant since Paris Agreement has been adopted. So the ICJ was looking at this argument that is Paris Agreement distinct, completely separate from Kyoto Protocol and the UNFCCC. So Paris Agreement, does it mean, since it doesn't explicitly mention CBDR RC principle, does it mean that it has done away with the concept of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities? If that argument is accepted, then it essentially means the equity concept is gone in climate action, which means developed nations will wash their hands off. They will not be accountable for their historical responsibilities. They will not even be obligated to share finance and technology with developing underdeveloped countries. So that's why the matter was being heard by the ICJ, and it has delivered advisory opinion which favors the global south. The ICJ has made it very clear that even with Paris Agreement, though it does not explicitly mention CBDR and RC principle, this principle is at the very foundation of climate change talks and negotiations. The ICJ has advised that UNFCCC and Kyoto Protocol cannot be seen as separate and distinct from Paris Agreement. They all stem from the same foundation. The Paris Agreement was built upon the Climate Change Convention, so was Kyoto Protocol, and the Paris Agreement was a continuation of the Kyoto Protocol climate commitments that was brought in place. So principles like CBDR and RC, the principle of equity that ensures fairness in climate action, is something that is integral to Paris Agreement as well. And this is an opinion of ICJ that favors the global south. It backs the position of developing underdeveloped countries that though Paris Agreement doesn't explicitly mention the principle, this principle is at the very heart of climate change negotiations. Meaning developed countries will always be seen as more accountable for their historical emissions, for the historical responsibilities on them. Meaning they will have to contribute more to climate action efforts. They will also have to assist the global south by transferring climate finance and sharing technology to help the weaker countries transition towards clean, renewable forms of energy. So this opinion of ICJ does bear a lot of weight as far as the climate talks are concerned. Now, talking about the CBDR-RC principle, the ICJ has opined that countries are expected under Climate Change Convention to take up the required climate action as per their capabilities. Meaning, as a country starts developing at a faster rate, because the status of a country is not static, right? Maybe 30 years ago, a country was underdeveloped. Today, it might have become a fast growing country. It will become an emerging economy, slowly later transitioning towards a developed economy as well. So the status of a country, the economic status, developmental status will keep on evolving. It will keep on changing. It's not static. So ICJ has ruled that countries have to step up their capabilities as they progress economically as well. Now, this interpretation of ICJ could be problematic for countries like India. The global south countries may not agree with this interpretation. They might have an issue with this because if this concept is accepted, that with changing developmental status that you are expected to contribute more, then this again could be seen as undermining the concept of CBDR and RC. So there is some confusion regarding this, whether ICJ wants developing nations to follow this principle when it comes to improved capabilities, and does it mean that they have to contribute more in the coming years and coming decades? Most countries are likely to reject this. But the fact that ICJ has upheld the CBDR-RC principle and the totality of all the climate protocols and agreements under Climate Change Convention is very, very significant. It means that the world cannot see UNFCCC as a distinct convention separated from Paris Agreement. Some countries have tried doing it. The developed nations have tried to create a separate distinction between Kyoto Protocol, Paris Agreement, and UNFCCC. So ICJ has made it clear that UNFCCC is the foundation of all climate agreements that are there. Kyoto Protocol is a product of it. Paris Agreement is a product of it. So the totality of the climate framework has been reiterated by ICJ. It has reiterated the CBDR and RC principle, the principle of equity, which favors the global south and the developing nations. But one opinion which could be problematic is with regard to improved capabilities and better contribution for climate action efforts, which might result in opposition from the developing underdeveloped countries. Now, coming to the temperature goal. See, under Paris Agreement, there are two distinct targets which have been set as far as the temperature limit is concerned. The Paris Agreement under Article 2.1, it clearly mandates that the global community will strive towards keeping the rise in temperatures to under 2 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels by the end of this century. By 2100, they will limit the rise in global temperatures to under 2 degrees Celsius in comparison to pre-industrial levels. And in a best case scenario, they'll try to restrict the global rise in temperatures to under 1.5 degrees Celsius in the same time period with the same reference point. So these are the two goals. So first goal is essentially to limit the global rise in temperature to under 2 degrees Celsius and strive towards keeping the global rise in temperature to under 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is a more ambitious target. Now, under Paris Agreement, countries are declaring their INDCs, their intended nationally determined contributions. Their voluntary targets are announced, and they have to try and achieve those targets through their national efforts, depending on their respective capabilities. And eventually, they submit a report as well. To what extent they are complying with the targets, what is their progress. And under Paris Agreement, these targets can be reviewed as well. Now, ICJ has again given a slightly problematic interpretation. ICJ has said that Paris temperature goal is no longer relevant. ICJ has based its opinion on the latest assessment report, the AR6 of Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, which is like the think tank that guides climate action efforts. The ICJ has said that the only target in climate change is to keep the global rise in temperature under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, this is almost unachievable because right now most predictions are indicating that the world might have already breached this target. Or if not, in another few years and decades, the world will most definitely breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, the threshold beyond which climate change could start becoming irreversible. So ICJ has said that the twin goals of Paris Agreement, the two different targets of keeping temperature rise under 2 degrees and if possible under 1.5 degrees is no longer valid. And ICJ is saying that the only temperature goal is to limit the global rise in temperature and keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is unlikely to be achieved. Most likely, we are already breaching this target. So this again doesn't make sense as far as the advisory opinion is concerned. And the interpretation of ICJ when it comes to enforcement of the obligation is also pretty weak. Because see, this is one major problem with any international legal framework. They lack the enforcement powers. Even when it comes to Paris Agreement targets, countries have declared their voluntary goals, right? They do report their progress. But what if they are not matching the standards? What if they are not achieving the targets and goals? Will there be any punitive action, any penalties imposed on them? The Paris Agreement says, yes, there would be some kind of action initiated, but it is not clear as to what action would be initiated. So the ICJ says this is left to the jurisdiction of the respective courts. The ICJ doesn't provide that clarity here as to what would be the global framework, the legal framework to impose a penalty on those countries which are not abiding by their targets that they are declaring under the Paris Agreement. So enforcement again remains very lax. See, this is one major problem with all the international legal frameworks. Enforcement is always very lax, and ICJ further reinforces this. So this again has raised concerns as well that ICJ should have used this opportunity to try and nudge the countries towards a enforcement mechanism where those who do not meet their targets could face some kind of penalties. They should have been pushed to contribute more for climate finance and contribute to the climate action efforts of underdeveloped countries. Maybe such punishments or penalties should have been imposed, but ICJ remains silent on this, and it essentially says the existing legal framework will take care of it, and the concerned courts at national level will take care of it, which is a very vague advisory opinion, very vague opinion that has been passed by the ICJ. But what is important is that it has upheld the CBDR RC principle, which is very important for countries like India, and it has upheld the totality of all the climate agreements under the Climate Change Convention, declaring the UNFCCC as the foundation of all climate talks. So this protects the principle of equity. It gives more strength for developing nations to stand up against the attempts of developed countries, right? But the other two concerns, as I pointed out, is with regard to the vague temperature goal, which it has declared. Then again, it's not sure whether countries will accept this or not. And also with regard to enforcement, it's largely, it's not expressing its clear stand, and it has not put in place a strict enforcement mechanism. So this is what we take away from this important article. Now take up a practice question based on this. How has the advisory opinion of International Court of Justice reiterated the fundamental principles of UNFCCC? Very straightforward question. Now, what do you do when such questions are given? Because this is based on current events, right? And it's based on a very important topic. So, first, in the introduction, you can either talk about the role and relevance of UNFCCC, or you can discuss about ICJ's advisory opinion. Just give an introduction that ICJ has passed a very important advisory opinion regarding the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. Try to set the context in current affairs, or try to deal with the core topic itself in the introduction, talking why UNFCCC is important. Give a little bit of background. Mention the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement. Explain that relevance. Then in the body, you have to bring out the CBDR-RC principle and the principle of equity, the concept of historical emissions, which was codified under the Kyoto Protocol, which is rooted in the Climate Change Convention. So this has to be explained very clearly at the start of the body itself, so that you can stress upon why this principle is so important. And then dive into the advisory opinion of ICJ in the next part of the body. Try to dissect the advisory opinion. You can do this in the form of bullet points. What is the advisory opinion given by ICJ on the CBDR-RC principle and the totality of the climate change framework? What is the advisory opinion of ICJ on the principle of equity? What is the advisory opinion with regard to temperature goal and enforcement mechanisms? 3 to 4 bullet points. So you would have explained ICJ's advisory opinion. Then express your view. In the next part of the body, bring out your view, your assessment of this advisory opinion of ICJ. See, you don't have to talk about ICJ and its structure. It's not needed here. The question is not asking for it. Correct? So directly express your views about this opinion. You can point out that ICJ's ruling to uphold the CBDR-RC principle and principle of equity is a big win for Global South. It helps strengthen the climate framework, which is under assault by the developed nations. It helps protect the principle of equity, right? But however, the opinion regarding the temperature goal has led to ambiguity. And also, with regard to enforcement mechanisms, ICJ has again left a legal vacuum. And this again highlights the lack of enforcement in international legal framework. So that is something you can highlight as a shortcoming of this advisory opinion. And then conclude your answer. In the conclusion, you have to again stress upon the importance of principle of equity. Why principle of equity is crucial for developing nations like India when it comes to climate change talks. Why climate change convention provides for this foundation to be established, and how this advisory opinion of ICJ is critical to uphold the principle of equity. So on those lines, conclude your answer, and this will make for a good structure. So let's see if you guys can write an answer and post your answers in the comment section. Now let's move on to the next article. There's a very interesting column on page number 6 that talks about the rising informalization in the formal sector of the Indian economy. The writer expresses deep concern about the rising trend of contractual labor across industries, be it in manufacturing, even in services. A lot of employers, they prefer hiring contractual labor, and there has been a significant jump in contractual employment that is increasing the informalization of the formal sector of the economy. Now let's look at both sides of the argument. Let's understand why employers prefer contract laborers. What are the advantages for the industry by hiring more contract laborers? And what are the drawbacks? How does it threaten labor welfare and labor rights? And how this could impact our industries, our manufacturing and services industries. Let's break this down. Now, if you look at data from the ASI, the Annual Surveys of Industries, this data reveals that in 1999-2000, around 20% of our formal workforce was employed on contractual labor. If you take all the formal employment in the country, right? 20% of those employed would be on contract labor, meaning they're not permanently hired by a company. They're not on the payroll of the company, right? They just have a contract with a certain organization delivering certain work and services based on their skills and their capabilities. And they get paid only for the work that they are doing with no additional benefits, like no social security, no gratuity, no pension, no provident fund, no insurance, no social security at all. Only some amount is paid for the work which is delivered by the contractual employees. So 20% was the size of that workforce, the contractual labor workforce in the formal sector as of 99 2000. Now, in 22 years, this number has more than doubled to 40.7%. Data from 2022-23 indicates that in our industries, in the formal sector, both in manufacturing and services combined together, out of the total employees who are employed formally, right, 40.7% of them are on contractual labor. Meaning contractual employment has been doubled. So what are the advantages for the employers? Why do they prefer contractual employment? That is very clear, right? If the percentage of contractual employment has doubled, it means the companies are preferring it. The organizations are preferring contractual labor over full-time recruitment. But what are those advantages? Why are they preferring contractual employment? According to organizations, the private companies, this gives them operational flexibility. It reduces the cost of operation. And more importantly, it helps them tap the right skills that are needed for specific jobs, for specific tasks. This is what the industry argues, that allowing contractual employment has a lot of benefits for the industry. Operationally, they can be very flexible, meaning when there is a sudden rise in demand, they can hire more contract laborers. And usually this is done with the help of a third party. Third party recruiting firms help in bringing the contractual labor only for a defined contract period, maybe 6 months, 1 year, etc. Only when the demand is expected to be high, when you need the skilled labor, you can hire them only for that period, pay them only for that work which is done. And once that demand subsides or once the task is completed, you can end the contract, thereby cutting the expenses for the organization. And even during the period of contract, the other expenses, the other cost a company incurs on the employees will also be negligible in case of contract employees, because they'll not have any access to social security. The organization will not be contributing to their pension, their gratuity, their provident fund, etc. This significantly reduces the cost, the labor cost, the actual wages which are paid out, and results in significant savings for the organizations. So it helps them match the demands present in the economy and work with the changing conditions and keep their costs lower while getting access to the required skills. That is why many organizations prefer contractual employment. But what is really concerning is that contract employees do not have protection under the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947. Under the Industrial Disputes Act, laborers enjoy certain rights. You can't be terminated at the will and wish of the organization, right? You have certain protection when it comes to layoffs, when it comes to employee welfare and basic labor rights, which is guaranteed through this statute, which is even legally enforceable, at least some of the provisions. And this provides for protection for employees from exploitation, from being abused by the employer. But once you're on contractual employment, once you're not on the payroll of the company, you're not formally employed by the organizations are not obligated under the provisions of the Industrial Disputes Act. And these contract laborers do not enjoy any protection of the labor laws, which means they can be terminated at any point in time. Even pending payment sometimes can be withheld with very little legal options left for the contractual employees. And this has happened to several employees in our country, where organizations have exploited this route, right? Almost they have ended up abusing the contract laborers, paying them much lower salaries and lower uh, wages than what is present in the market. And they are not using it for getting right skills or maintaining operational flexibility. They are using it only to keep their costs lower, only to cut the cost, cut the expenses. Studies have established very clearly that most private organizations are abusing contractual employment system just to keep the cost lower. And this directly affects labor welfare. So that is the concern being brought up in this article. So what can be done? See, Government of India has various schemes and initiatives in this regard. For example, the Pradhan Mantri Rozgar Protsahan Yojana that was launched. Through this, the government has been giving incentives to encourage employers to hire full-time employees, to prefer full-time employment over contractual employment. Recently, the government has brought out the Employment Linked Incentive Scheme, which was announced in this year's budget, where the government is subsidizing the social security cost for a company that provides for full-time employment. So part of the EPF contribution or employment pension scheme contribution is given by the government as a subsidy of sorts, as an incentive to encourage the employer to prefer hiring permanent workforce. Because when permanent workforce is not prioritized and when organizations prefer to hire contractual laborers, studies have shown that this affects productivity as well in the economy. Because when you're not on the payroll of a company, you don't feel attached to the organization. You're not connected with the vision, the ethos of the organization, and naturally your productivity goes down. Though companies are saving the cost, there is a clear decline in productivity. Studies have shown that there is a clear difference in the wages being paid out. 14 to 31% difference in the wages, meaning those who are formally employed, who are on full role employment by the organization, right? They will end up getting up to 14 to 31% more salaries as compared to those who are on contractual employment. Meaning the amount being paid out to them is lower, which affects the welfare of the laborers. And at the same time, it affects their motivation. They're not committed to the goal. They're not connected with the organization, with the vision of the company. They will not contribute to the optimum standards. And this overall brings down productivity in the economy. It has a larger cyclical effect. This has a negative effect on the economy as employees will lose that motivation, the morale to work for the organization, right? They don't feel that they belong to the company because the company doesn't treat them as their own family. And that is where productivity takes a hit. The economy takes a hit. So the writers are suggesting that the government should encourage companies to try and bring more formal employment to recruit people for the long term. At least the contract period should be prolonged for 5 years, 10 years to give some guarantee, give some job guarantee and income guarantee to the working class. Because if there is no guarantee of work and guarantee of employment and income, right, that is where the workforce loses its motivation, right? It puts them under a lot of misery and they're not having the benefits of social security as well. It leaves them all the more vulnerable, right? Without insurance, provident fund, and gratuity, those contract laborers would be even more vulnerable if they face any disruption in their lives or careers. Now, if you look at the new labor codes, in 2020, new labor codes were brought out by the government, which tries to address these issues. For example, it provides for a better balance between the demands of the employers and the concerns of the contract laborers. It does recognize some of the rights of the contract employees and tries to focus on labor welfare. At the same time, it tries to create more flexibility for the employers to take in contractual employment. Now, under the new labor codes, if they come into effect, see, right now they are not being enforced because there is strong opposition from the trade and labor union, right? These new labor codes have not taken full effect, but it does have a provision that allows companies to directly hire contract employees without a third party, without the need for any third party involvement. And it tries to secure better welfare for the contract laborers. So the writer says, along with these new laws, what is needed is more encouragement from the government to incentivize the organizations to, hire people for the long run, hire them for the long run so that they build a connect with the organization. So they are pushed and motivated to do better for the company and does in return contribute to the economy as well. So that is the opinion of the writers. And based on this, you can take up a practice question as well. Contractualization in India's formal manufacturing is linked to more cost avoidance than it being a focus on genuine labor flexibility or skills. Examine. Now let's look at the next article on page 6. There's a very disturbing article on the topic of human trafficking. Human trafficking is one of the biggest organized criminal activity on par with drug trafficking, arms trafficking, and many times they're all interconnected. Human trafficking refers to the kidnapping, smuggling of humans, where they are pushed into forced labor or bonded labor or even immoral activities and prostitution as well. So, especially the victims are women and children who are at grave risk of being pushed into immoral activities, being pushed into prostitution, and being abused. So, this writer is specifically focused on the massive problem of human trafficking in the state of Bihar, where young girls are often kidnapped, pushed into these trafficking cartels. Sometimes they are sold off by their own family to these traffickers, because in Bihar, there is a human trafficking hub, a sort of a mafia that operates, that has been thriving. And the writer expresses serious concern about this social issue and also highlights the security problem associated with this. Now, if you're aware, in Bihar, there is a culture across rural parts of Bihar in particular, where these dance troops, these so-called orchestras that perform on the street are quite popular, right? They are hired for performance during political rallies, elections, even during some religious events, or even during personal family events. So there is a wide prevalence of such dance troupes and orchestras across Bihar, particularly rural Bihar. Now, this dance has often taken the wrong path, right? It is often seen as explicit, where women dancers are used dancing for vulgar songs, deliberately forced to dress provocatively. Usually, they're dancing in front of a male audience, which is usually drunk, who are in an inebriated condition. And if the girls and women who are forced to perform for these orchestras and dance troupes, if they refuse to dance, if they refuse to perform, they're often beaten, they're abused, and sometimes sexually abused, molested, and even raped. So, this is a major social problem in Bihar and a security problem as well. According to data, the data is absolutely alarming. Every year, thousands of children, especially the girl child, right? They are often kidnapped, right? And not just in Bihar, the network operates across the country, especially in the neighboring states like Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Jharkhand, even from Assam, Odisha, especially where there is a lot of backwardness in the given region where families are struggling, right? So there is an incentive in some of the families to give away a girl child in return for attractive income, which is promised by these middlemen, by these traffickers, right? They often deceive parents as well. Many times parents are not aware. They say that your child is very talented, she can become a great dancer. They lure them with money. So poor families across these parts of India, they often get lured by this scam, and they eventually give away the girls to these dance troupes and orchestras, and they're later pushed into performing these immoral acts, pushed into prostitution as well, and sexually abused and raped and molested. So, this is a burning crisis, a humanitarian crisis, because there are lakhs and lakhs of such incidents in the country. Every year, thousands of cases where children go missing, right? Especially the girl child, often kidnapped and sometimes sold off by their own family. Sometimes the families are not aware, but in some cases, families know what is happening. But yet, they are ready to sell off the girl child because they often see the girl child as a burden, right? Because of the prevalent patriarchal mindset. They often see the girl child as a burden and they conveniently sell off the girl child as well. So, this is a persistent problem, and the data from Bihar, as I said, is quite shocking and alarming. There are several NGOs working in this domain, working with the concerned government authorities to crack down on human trafficking. Because, see, this illicit activity is enabled in Bihar. Bihar has become a hub. Because, see, there is a market. There are those who are profiting from this illegal activity. In the name of dance, these troops and orchestras, they are essentially legitimizing this illegal activity, and there are these mafias, cartels, which are profiting from it. Bihar is well connected with several other neighboring states. And as a result, it's easy for the traffickers to move the girls and bring them into Bihar, maybe from Assam or Odisha or West Bengal or UP. They're easily trafficked through trains, buses, through public transport itself. And Bihar shares a key international border with Nepal, which is a trafficking hub. The India-Nepal border is highly porous. There are many natural gaps in the border, and it has become a hub of organized criminal activity, including human trafficking. So, women and the girl child, right, or children in general who are trafficked, they are easily smuggled across the border by these traffickers and sometimes sold off in the international trafficking market as well. So, it is this which makes Bihar the hub of human trafficking and poses a direct threat for women's safety and security and safety of the girl child. See, we do have sufficient laws in our country. Doesn't mean we don't have laws to tackle with human trafficking. We have plenty of laws in this regard. We have the Juvenile Justice Act, the Immoral Trafficking Act. We have the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, which explicitly prohibits trafficking and such criminal activities, makes them criminal punishable offenses. We also have POCSO, Protection of Children from Sexual Offences Act. So there are plenty of laws in place. There are institutions to deal with this as well. The Child Welfare Commissions at the national, state, and local level, right? But despite this, the prevalence of these activities are continuing. This is primarily due to lack of enforcement. It is also due to a corrupt nexus between some local politicians, local authorities, especially local police, and these criminal mafias. They would be bribing off the local officials, and they essentially look the other way, even when it is happening right in front of them. Recently, controversial videos have surfaced from the Kanvar Yatra, right, where the Kanvaryas were using such trafficked girls to perform immoral acts and very explicit vulgar dance at a religious rally. So that has raised questions about the way in which the practice has, percolated in the society. It has become some sort of a normal thing, especially in parts of Bihar. It has come to be accepted as very normal. So there is a need to crack down on this mafia. And to break the nexus, you need strict enforcement of these laws. You need the civil society, the NGOs to bring that pressure on the government. The local administration has to really work with the civil society here to bring an end to these criminal cartels. Or else these activities will flourish, posing not just a security threat, but posing a bigger social concern. So if women's safety has to be ensured, if the girl child has to be protected, and if women in general have to be kept safe from these illicit activities and trafficking rings, it is very, very important to enforce the legislation on the ground, right? The money routes have to be tackled. local police, and even at the national level, agencies like Enforcement Directorate, National Investigation Agency, they all have a mandate where they can deal with organized crime and trafficking. So they need to crack down on the financing routes, the way in which the money is being moved around. And local police in particular, they will have to work with the local administration or railway protection force, right? Keep vigilance at railway stations and bus stands where often the girl child is kidnapped and taken and trafficked, right? They need to maintain surveillance at the grassroots level to prevent such cases from coming up. And NGOs which have been working, they report a even more alarming trend where they successfully break these trafficking cartels with help of authorities. They return the women and the girl child to their families, but the families push them back into trafficking. Some families which have sold off the girl child or pushed women out into trafficking, they push them back again, and the cycle keeps on repeating. Because once they are trapped in this vicious cycle, there's no way for them to break out of it. Which means the government should even focus on empowering women, educating them, making them financially independent so that they're not pushed into these activities as well. So that is what we take away from this important article. Next, on page 10, there's a very important development as far as India's ties with Syria is concerned. I would like to give a quick update on this. See, last year in Syria, there was a major uprising during which President Bashar al-Assad, his regime was toppled. And now there is an interim government in Syria which has been set up by radical groups, terrorist organizations such as the HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which toppled Bashar al-Assad's government last year. Since then, India was closely watching the events in Syria. We had not formally established contact with the interim government in Syria. But now, after considering all the possibilities and after understanding that the interim government is, establishing a viable administration, India has reached out to the interim government in Syria and established its first official contact. India's joint secretary for the MENA region, Middle East, North Africa region, in the Ministry of External Affairs, along with the Indian ambassadors to Syria, they have met with the foreign minister of the interim government. This is the first high-level official contact between India and the interim regime, which is formed by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which was seen as a terrorist organization. Its leader, Muhammad al-Julani, was the one who toppled Bashar al-Assad, and now he has assumed a different identity. He has appointed himself as the president of the interim government, and now he goes by the name Ahmad al-Shara. Many countries have reached out to President Ahmad al-Shara, who at one point was a recognized terrorist. Now, United States itself has struck a deal with President al-Shara. Donald Trump has even met al-Shara and struck deals with the interim government. So this paves the way for India as well to engage with the Syrian government, because Syria has been a key partner for India. For more than 50 years, India was very, very close to the Assad family. Ever since the senior Assad, the father of Bashar al-Assad, captured power in 1970 and established the dictatorship of the Alawite family, which is a Shia family in a Sunni country. Since then, India has maintained extremely close ties with the Alawite sect, who were the political influential class in Syria, and maintained close relations with Assad family. Syria has been a key supplier of phosphates and fertilizers and some key raw materials, which are critical for our fertilizer industry and agriculture industry. India had a lot of dependency on Syria. But ever since the civil war started, these supplies had taken a hit. But India in general maintained good ties with Bashar al-Assad and the ruling Alawite sections. But now things have turned around. The Alawites have been kicked out of power. The Assad family has been toppled, right? Now India has recognized the interim government just like every other country. And now we have established formal contact with the leadership, met the foreign minister. And most likely India will soon have official contact with President Ahmad al-Shara as well. So this is a big development, marking a shift in India's foreign policy towards Syria. Next, there's an article related to economy. It's related to the FTA that was recently signed between India and United Kingdom, the CETA, Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement. So the provisions of this agreement has already been discussed in previous sessions. But I would like to point out one specific provision under the CETA that focuses on MSME sector. How a separate provision has been carved out for micro, small, medium enterprises, which is the backbone of India's manufacturing and the Indian economy. If you're aware, MSME sector contributes nearly 60% of the employment, particularly in the manufacturing sector, accounting for nearly 40% of our exports. So MSME sector, which is usually labor intensive, requires large quantums of manual labor, is primarily a job creating sector, creating millions of jobs, contributing to India's exports. So under this trade agreement with UK, special provisions have been carved out to protect the MSME sector and even create opportunities for them. Now, this is a very big positive development because this could become a precedent that we can follow with ongoing trade negotiations with United States and European Union. As India is currently negotiating a trade deal with the US and a free trade agreement with European Union, we can ensure similar provisions are carved out for MSME sector to create unique opportunities for them. Now, under the India-UK FTA, for example, both sides are identifying a point of contact so that the MSME industries will receive a boost in both countries, which can increase their market access. The two sides will work together, and the point of contact who's identified, it could be the industry association or an entity which is identified, will drive closer ties between the MSME industries. And for example, the point of contact in UK will provide better space and representation for India's MSME products in the UK market and vice versa. Be it at trade exhibitions, at business conferences, the MSME industry will get special benefits to showcase their products and to access each other's market. So this will be a big boost for the smaller industries, the medium and the micro enterprises. And under the trade agreement, when it comes to public procurement, that is government procurement, India is allowing UK's small industries, the MSME industries of UK, to bid for government procurement in India. They'll be treated as class 2 local suppliers. But however, India's local MSMEs will be protected as they will be recognized as class 1 local suppliers. So India's MSME suppliers who take part in public procurement, they will get priority, while there is an opportunity for UK suppliers as well to take part in government tendering process and in public procurement. So it creates opportunity for UK's industries, but it creates protection as well for India's MSME sector, as public procurement is a key source of revenue for our small and micro and medium enterprises. So such protections are built into the trade agreement. Opportunities have been created in the trade agreement itself. So this could become a new template for India when we are negotiating upcoming trade agreements, especially with United States and with European Union. Next, in a big breakthrough, Indian security agencies have managed to neutralize the Pakistani terrorists who were said to be behind the dastardly Pahalgam terror attack. Yesterday, a heated debate finally took place in the parliament as the government had accepted the demand of the opposition to discuss about Pahalgam attack and Operation Sindoor. But what we saw in the parliament was largely a political blame game on all sides, right? But something interesting happened in Kashmir, in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Dachigam region, where you have the Dachigam National Park. 3 of the terrorists who were said to be involved in the Pahalgam incident, right, in the Pahalgam terror attack, they were being tracked actively by our intelligence agencies. The IB was leading a massive operation, deploying both human and technical intelligence sources, and was actively working with the Indian Army, the JK police, and CRPF to track down the perpetrators of Pahalgam terror attack. They have managed to successfully identify them. Initially, there was a lot of confusion that maybe there were 5 to 6 terrorists involved at the Baisaran Meadow incident. Later, reports indicated, interrogations revealed that it was essentially 3 terrorists. And the IB managed to zero down on their identity. Initial findings also said there might be a local Kashmiri who might have supported these foreign Pakistani terrorists. But IB later verified that the 3 terrorists responsible for the terror attack at Pahalgam were all Pakistani terrorists. Their location was zeroed in, and eventually, through this operation led by the Indian Army, all the 3 Pakistani terrorists have been eliminated, thus bringing closure to the victims of Pahalgam terror attack. So this is indeed a big development. It again points to the extent of Pakistani involvement. Given that all the 3 terrorists were Pakistani nationals, Pakistani citizens, as confirmed by Home Minister Amit Shah and Prime Minister Modi, it shows the extent of state involvement from Pakistan, and it also highlights the counter-terror grid that India has put in place in J&K. How IB leads the counter-terror efforts from the intelligence side, deploying human assets on the ground, infiltrating the terror organizations, and even intercepting the technical communications, right? Tracking mobile phones, tracking patterns, tracking the movement of money to identify the key terrorists. Because one of them who was killed was a A-grade terrorist from Lashkar-e-Toiba. All the 3 were from Lashkar-e-Toiba, right? That explains why the TRF took the blame, the resistance front, because the TRF is a proxy, a shadow group of Lashkar-e-Toiba. So now this establishes the success of our counter-terror operations as well, where India is able to hunt down these terrorists who are responsible for brutal attacks within few days and weeks. But again, there are a lot of questions which remain unanswered. The opposition raised few valid questions against the government regarding Operation Sindoor and the Pahalgam terror attack, which were largely unanswered by the government. As I said, it turned into just a political slugfest. But that said, let's move on to the prelim section, look at the 3 small articles, and we'll end the session for today. So look at this article. The DRDO has successfully tested the Pralay missile. The Pralay is a key platform which India is indigenously developing, and it is going to play a critical role in India's future military operations. The Pralay is a quasi-ballistic missile. It's not exactly a ballistic missile, because usually ballistic missiles take a parabolic path, briefly enter outer space, and they make a re-entry. So when a projectile adopts such a path, right, from surface to surface, from moment of launch to moment of impact, if the projectile takes this parabolic path, exits the Earth's atmosphere briefly, enters into outer space and makes a recurve and re-enters the atmosphere, such a projectile is often said to take the ballistic path. Those missiles are called ballistic missiles. But Pralay is like a quasi-ballistic missile. It brings the features of a ballistic missile with features of other long-range rockets. So it's a hybrid platform that can carry multiple warheads, conventional warheads, and it can strike in a range of 150 to 500 kilometers. It has a lot of flexibility when it comes to range. It can be used for striking medium range targets as well, and relatively long range targets which are almost 500 kilometers away. It's a solid fueled, a solid propelled missile, and eventually this is going to be inducted with BrahMos, Nirbhay, and the others into our Strategic Forces Command, and potentially it can be mated with a nuclear warhead as well. Though it's not designed to be nuclear capable, this can be seen as India's future tactical battlefield weapon. And potentially it can be mated with a nuclear warhead if necessary, if the need arises. So there is a possibility that it might be integrated into the integrated rocket force, which is coming up under Strategic Forces Command, which already has BrahMos, Nirbhay, Pinaka in its arsenal. And the Pralay could also be inducted. So this project, which was started a few years ago, has been successfully completed. They have been inducted as well into Indian Army and Indian Air Force. And Pralay is primarily designed to target enemy radars, enemy communication, command control centers. So it can be used effectively in offensive operations to take out enemy infrastructure, the military infrastructure. Next, on page 12, there's an article which points out that the Kaziranga Tiger Reserve in Assam has registered the 3rd highest tiger density in the country. The highest tiger density in India is recorded at Bandipur Tiger Reserve in the state of Karnataka. Bandipur is set to host almost 19.83 tigers in a 1,450 square kilometer area approximately. So this is the highest tiger density as per the tiger estimation, the census, the All India Tiger Census, which is conducted. Second comes Corbett. The Corbett Tiger Reserve in Uttarakhand records the second highest density with 19.56 tigers on average in a 1,288 square kilometer territory. Now, Kaziranga Tiger Reserve in Assam, which otherwise is known for the one-horned rhinoceros, is boasting 148 tigers in a 1,000 square 100 kilometer protected area, which brings the density to an impressive 18.65 and thus places Kaziranga Tiger Reserve at the third place when it comes to the highest tiger density in India. So please make a note of this fact, could be relevant for the prelims exam. The last article, again from Environment and Ecology, researchers have stumbled upon the Barbados thread snake, which is a very, very rare, hard to find species. Most experts had thought it had gone extinct. It had not been spotted in the wild for many, many years, for more than 20 years. It is endemic to Barbados, the Caribbean island country, Barbados. That's where this snake is found. And this is the tiniest snake in the world. It's just like the size of an earthworm, as small as that. Even in its adult size, it fits basically the size of a coin. It's as small as that, right? So maximum it will grow to around 10 centimeters in length. They're actually blind. They burrow into the ground. They usually dwell under the surface of the earth or under the rocks and the foliage which is present in the forests, right? They primarily feed on termites, ants, and small insects that are available on the ground. They only lay one egg, and full grown length would be maximum of 10 centimeters. So it's the tiniest snake in the world. It had been presumed to have gone extinct as researchers had not spotted it in the wild for many, many decades. And finally, recently, a Barbados thread snake has been spotted by a conservationist in Barbados. So its IUCN red status on the red list of IUCN is critically endangered. So this finding is significant. So just remember where the thread snake can be found, the Barbados thread snake, and some features regarding it and its conservation status. Because generally UPSC tends to ask questions on species that are in news. So this brings my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the key topics. And if you like the session, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That's it. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.